First off, I'd like to say thank you all for braving the traffic. I know it's insane outside, and we're getting messages about a lot of people being still stuck somewhere near Victoria. So thank you for turning up this morning. Rona, the last time she was on our stage, was chair of the BBC Trust. She's been with Bombardier, she's been with Morgan Stanley, the CEO of Financial Times, and in her last role, when she didn't turn up, she was in government as the senior-most business leader in government at a time that, mildly put, was difficult for government. So thank you for coming in to talk about a position that you resigned from last month. And you've essentially said that you said it was planned, the deadline was set for you to exit. Now that you have a 360-degree view, business, media, government, tell us in this room where the UK really stands on the world stage now.
Wow, that's a big one. So let me just give the sort of the context of the world, and I think it was alluded to yesterday in many ways. There are clearly, call them headwinds, call them tensions on the trading part of the world. My job was on trying to boost trade between the UK and the rest of the world. Therefore, those trade tensions have a big potential impact. So you have those trade tensions, you clearly have the Brexit uncertainty, you clearly have the uncertainty potentially of a change in government with the potential of nationalising of industries. So there's an awful lot of uncertainty in the backdrop. And I think it's not just for the UK that those uncertainties exist. And if you look at a recent WTO report, the uncertainty is increased by about 4 or 5-fold from 2005 to now. But here's the paradox. There is still growth in the world. The UK is still growing. The exports are at their highest ever level, in part because of the exchange rate, yes. But what I found quite genuinely when I went to represent the UK was a number of things. Firstly, there is still very significant demand for UK goods and services. And it basically gets down to people sticking to what they do and providing services and goods that people want. It sounds so simple, but it all gets forgotten. So the UK is still seen as a heartland of innovation. If you look at the investment that's coming in fintech, it's still significant. And the UK approach, which is seen as collaborative, working with locals, working with the communities around any investment project, is something that the rest of the world respects. The soft power that we talk about in the UK is still very real. The institutions, the civil service, the BBC, our academic institutions bring a power and a credibility to this country. And what I found was a real receptiveness to the UK. And what surprised me was just the ability, when I was on the board of HSBC, I was on the board of Pepsi, when you ask when you're challenging regulations in countries, you have an impact. When you go with UK government, you really are able to have more impact than I ever expected. So I have been actually very, very pleasantly surprised by just how much impact you can have in a public role in trade, coming from business into government. I know you had this ambition and you made a lot of comments about wanting to up the exports of the UK. 30% of our exports, 30% of the economy comes from exports, and you were targeting, saying at some point we need to reach the German levels. But let's be honest, uncertainty doesn't help. When you talk to government and you try and bring that collaboration from a business perspective in government, what was the reaction you would get from politicians who are, dealing with other issues? I don't think anybody questions the need for a strong economy and strong trading flows. So I was very clear coming into government that I would have a very specific role for a period of time. And the specific role was something that could be achieved within that time. And the role was to put together an export strategy. And basically, my view was government doesn't export, government doesn't trade, businesses trade. So the best thing we can do in government is to ask businesses how government can help them. And the really interesting part was the consistency of it. Both small and medium-sized and large businesses said, essentially, you can inform us in different ways. There is a huge convening and connecting power of government that we don't use. And government can help finance, like, for example, through UK export finance. They also, as a government, we can help encourage the exporters or companies to think about exporting, because, and the message that we kept saying was, for a small and medium organisation, if you're looking to have sustainable businesses that you can pass on to future generations, actually the evidence shows that those that export are more likely to have higher sales, higher profits, and endure longer. So, but what they said to us was to have someone from government, even someone that's come from business, telling them they should do it doesn't work. They wanted to hear from people that looked like them. So we started a scheme called Export Champions. And if you ever want to be inspired, go and meet some of them. I'll just give one example. It's a husband and wife couple, Dave and Wendy Macy. Their business is based up in Warrington. I went to see them at the end of the day. They're a chip and pin solution company. So they work behind the scenes in the financial markets. And they had managed to build this business with about 200 people in Warrington from scratch. But more importantly, they really believed in exporting. So the Duke of Edinburgh scheme, most people I hope will know about this, which is to bring young people, they often go outward bounding. Dave and Wendy created a part of the curriculum which was on exporting. They now have 400 kids who are really excited about exporting, and they're going to now take that countrywide. So meet some of these people, and we had this tagline from these export champions: if we can, you can. And we have found that, as has Charlie Mayfield in the Be the Business Productivity Drive, businesses want to hear from people that look like them, have been in the market, have practical advice, and that's what government can help facilitate, but not necessarily do.
When you were racking up the air miles and traveling across the world, because Rona was taking care of markets ex-EU, and that means long-haul flights, what, especially considering that Mr. Trump has kind of had a few of our delegates still traveling. What were the questions that you were asked about the UK when you were in the US, whether you were in China, whether you were in Southeast Asia? What was the big question that you were getting? Because if you read the media, you would think that everyone thinks that everything is in chaos anyways here.
I would say that most of the time, if you were I was meeting with Minister of Finance, sometimes the heads of state. They are interested in the bigger picture and the trading flows and opportunities, increased growth for their and our country, and increased trade. So they're looking for employment, and they're looking for jobs, and they're looking for technology. So what I found was the further away you went from the EU, the less Brexit featured. So if I went to Australia, Australia has one of the largest infrastructure programs for all of the main cities. The questions I have was, do you have the infrastructure capability? Which of your companies can help on this mass transit project? We're doing this stadium. How can we get your architects, your surveyors involved, and how can we build those together? So I found, partly because of the role that I was in, what people were looking for was that innovation, that sense of integrity. The fact that we speak English, I'm afraid, is just one of those things which makes us a partner that they can do business with. So what I read in the press and what I experienced were quite different. And that's what I found from businesses. All of those of you who are in businesses or in NGOs or in charities, you see the overall world, but you focus on what you can do. The export strategy tied in with the industrial strategy. The industrial strategy focuses, I think, in a fantastic way now on bringing the academic world, government, and businesses all together in a shared program in particular sectors like life sciences or like AI. And what we did was we usually pulled it around some brilliant people like Dame Wendy Hall in AI, and that pulls everybody together, and there's a real focus. And once you have that focus, I think a lot can be achieved.
Let's get some questions from the room, because I bet there are quite a few. Who's got a question for trading and where we go from here?
Robin Bowles, Chief Executive of In-Kind Direct. We have licensees in France, Germany, Singapore, and we do move goods. Especially, I'm concerned about Brexit and the EU now. Is anything, sorry to come back to Brexit, but is anything being done about if we do leave with no deal, what would happen with charities moving goods?
Should we caveat that you can only talk about ex-EU?
I mean, I think it's important to talk about the beast in the room, which is Brexit. It wasn't my direct area of responsibility, so I won't know the specific details. Just to be clear, from my personal view, I think a no deal Brexit would not be a great place to be, and therefore. You know, that has been my consistent position, and I've said that on the floor in the House of Lords. I just don't think a no-deal Brexit is a place that will be good for our businesses and our people. We do, however, have to prepare on the basis that that might happen. What I can say, just from the department that I was in, and I sat one removed from the trade policy, was that probably more has been done in preparation than is given credit for. If you look at what the position with the WTO, the UK schedules, day one tariff rates, those have all been put forward, proposed. The trade deals that we're party to, because we're a member of the EU, about 50% now have been rolled over. And therefore, and that only represents about 11% of our trade anyway. The rest is currently on the WTO rules outside any of those agreements. I think the challenge is the uncertainty and the unknown unknowns. So if you go to the old Donald Rumsfeld, I think the known knowns have been dealt with, and I think there should be a reasonable degree of confidence that that has happened. There are known unknowns that people know that they have to work with when the relationship with the EU is set. But I think there are also those unknown unknowns that will have to be dealt with. And if anybody was here yesterday, Cressida Dick talked about it's not impossible that we'll be able to deal with it, but it will be a steep hill and an awful lot of work. And I think she got that spot on. But if you want specific questions, then I think for specifics, which is what my position was always, businesses need specifics, charities need specifics. You'll have to go to HMRC who are managing any of those flows, because those are the ones who hold the pen on what happens.
We have another question.
Yes, good morning. Herta van Stiegel from LeasePlan. My question is regarding a potential trade agreement with the US. This morning, the FT had a very enlightening article about the hurdles and what it would take to even try to imagine that a treaty with the US could actually replace the relationship with the EU. Could you comment on that, please?
I mean, my position has always been you need a very strong... If the country has voted for Brexit, but that doesn't mean you can't have a strong relationship with the EU, and you have to have a strong relationship with the EU. The numbers are all public that were in the FT, which is that any form of Brexit is likely to have a hit to GDP, but the Office of National Statistics said it was between about 2% and 8 or 9% down. Any additional deal with the US has been of the order of sub 1%. So those are the bold facts. Now, those are the bold forecasts. So I think on that point, if you say EU disappears, then of course it won't. But they still remain our closest partners in terms of both location, and they still represent about 50% of our trade. Therefore, just pure logic tells you that if there's a small reduction with the EU, that has to be a much bigger increase elsewhere. But I do think there are potential. One of the areas where trade deals haven't yet been really focused until the Canadian trade deal was on services. And I think on the services side, we're both big services nations, that probably there is more potential there. So I'm not saying there isn't additional potential, but I think we'll need to look, and there are working groups looking at where those could be. I'm not involved in the detail of that, but again, I think that the forecasts play out as the FT said.
I think we have one more question.
Hi, Josette Sheeran, the head of the Asia Society and former U.S. trade negotiator. Perhaps the other elephant in the room, the U.S.-China trade war, what do you see as the potential fallout from that, and are you seeing the effects here in the U.K.?
I think I'm with a lot of people who would say it's not good for the world. Trade wars never are good for the world. So the rise of protectionism, the rise of trade tensions, I think the goal of all nations should be, how can we have an ability to de-escalate? How can we tackle some of the issues, the very real issues that do exist, and the concerns about different rules and people playing by the same rules of fair international trade. So a multilateral trade system based on free but fair and consistent rules. So at the moment, as I said, you can see the growth is slowing. You can see that, there are more concerns as you move, as they said yesterday, again, one of the speakers, from tariffs to also regulations, because non-tariff trade barriers have a multifold impact compared to tariffs on their own. So I think for anybody in this room that has the ability to do something to de-escalate, de-escalation is I think where we should be aiming, because I don't think trade wars are good for anyone.
How vulnerable are we right now with this standstill moment, if I can even call it that, with Brexit and the trade wars? How vulnerable is this country, in your opinion?
I mean, I think there are lots of uncertainties, but from the time, I mean, this is a genuine, what I wasn't expecting, that there is so much talent, there is so much capability, and there is so much willingness to work with us, buy our services, buy our goods, that I remain an optimist. We may go through some bumpy patches, but I remain an optimist, and actually more so having done this job and seeing just what the businesses in this country can do.
Rona, on that note, thank you so very much for having this conversation, and hopefully you'll join us for the rest of the program. Ladies, thank you very much.
Thank you.